Vivian Blackwood pressed her back against the corridor wall and stopped breathing. Through the gap in the study door, 3 inches of warm light and cigar smoke, she could see them. 4 men around a card table, coats off, sleeves pushed to the elbow, the remains of a cold supper scattered between crystal glasses that caught the firelight and threw it against the ceiling in small, trembling coins of gold. She had come downstairs for a candle. She had found something considerably worse. 20 guineas. Lord Ashford leaned back in his chair with the boneless confidence of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. He placed a gold coin on the green baize and spun it with 1 finger. The coin wobbled, caught the light, and fell flat. 20 guineas says she cries before Friday. The governess? That was Mr. Cavendish, blinking through spectacles that made his eyes look like boiled eggs. The new one. She arrived this morning. Precisely. Ashford set another coin beside the first. Fresh, unseasoned, hasn't learned the house rules yet. He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made Vivian think of a fox circling a henhouse. Not hungry, just entertained by the geometry of the kill. The best kind of quarry, gentlemen. Vivian's fingers found the doorframe. She held it the way a woman holds a knife, not for comfort, but for aim. Blackwood, wasn't it? Lord Pemberton swirled his brandy without drinking. Plain thing, severe dress. Looked like she'd been carved from a church pew and sent to punish the rest of us for sitting comfortably. Laughter. Low, male, certain of itself. All the better. Ashford's second coin joined the first. The plain ones crack faster. They arrive already bruised. 1 sharp word from a duke and they shatter like, "Enough!" The voice came from the head of the table, and the room rearranged itself around it. James Fairfax, the Duke of Montrose, set down his glass with a precision that made the crystal ring against mahogany. He was younger than Vivian had expected, 30, perhaps 32, with dark hair pushed carelessly back from a forehead that carried the permanent crease of a man who spent more time thinking than sleeping. His jaw was sharp enough to cast a shadow in the firelight, and his eyes held the flat, assessing calm of someone who had been bored for so long he'd forgotten what interest felt like. The bet is juvenile, Ashford. And yet, Ashford spread his hands. You haven't said no. A silence. The fire cracked and settled. A log split and sent a shower of sparks up the chimney. The Duke's jaw tightened. The first time Vivian would see that particular motion, though not the last. 1 week, Montrose said. If I cannot make her cry in 7 days, the 20 guineas are yours. If she weeps, by any cause I engineer, you pay me. Ashford whooped. Pemberton raised his glass. Cavendish wrote something in a small leather book, recording the terms with the fastidious care of a solicitor documenting a contract for cruelty. Vivian released the doorframe. Her pulse beat hard in her throat, but her hands were steady. She had traveled 9 hours by mail coach to reach this house. She owned 1 trunk, 2 dresses, and 14 shillings. The agency had called this position a miracle. A duke's household, full salary, room and board for a woman with no references and no family connections worth the paper to list them. She could leave. Walk upstairs, pack her trunk, be gone before the milk arrived at dawn. Find another agency, another position, another house where the men did not wager on her tears for sport. Or... Vivian pulled the red leather notebook from her apron pocket, the one she'd kept since she was 16, its spine cracked and soft, filled with every lesson she'd learned and every strategy she'd devised to survive households where women like her were furniture that could be shouted at. She opened it to a blank page. The pencil was blunt. She licked the tip and wrote in her small, precise hand. Day 1. The Duke has bet 20 guineas he can make me cry. He will lose. She closed the notebook, slid it back into her pocket, and walked upstairs with the candle she had originally come for. She did not sleep well. She slept well enough. The schoolroom was a long room on the third floor, east wing, with windows tall enough to let in the morning light and nothing else of any warmth. The walls were bare plaster, the color of an old bandage. The shelves held a set of encyclopedias so outdated, the spines had faded to the color of dust. And when Vivian pulled one down, the binding cracked and shed flakes of dried glue onto the floor like dead skin. A single table sat in the center, scarred with ink stains and the half-moon dents of a child's restless compass. The room smelled of chalk and cold stone, and the particular kind of neglect that settles over a space no one has cared about in a long time. Vivian set her notebook on the table and waited. Lady Charlotte arrived at 8 o'clock precisely, which was the first surprise. The child was 7, small for her age, with her father's dark hair cut bluntly at the jaw, and a gaze that could pin a beetle to a board and keep it there while she decided whether it was interesting enough to study. "You're the new one," Charlotte said from the doorway. "I am. The last one cried on the second day. The one before her lasted 4 days, but she cried in the pantry, so she thought nobody knew. Everybody knew. Cook said she could hear it through the flour bins." Vivian pulled out a chair. "What made them cry?" "Papa." Charlotte sat down, folding her hands on the table with the exaggerated formality of a child imitating adults she had studied more carefully than they realized. "He says things. Sharp things. The last governess said her method was—" Charlotte scrunched her face, excavating the phrase from memory. "Intellectually indistinguishable from neglect. That's a great many syllables for one insult. Papa likes syllables. He collects them the way other men collect horses." Charlotte tilted her head. "Are you going to cry?" "I haven't decided yet. What are you learning?" "French, geography, deportment." The nose wrinkle was immediate and devastating. "Deportment is sitting still and pretending you're furniture." "That does sound dreadful." "It is dreadful. It's the most dreadful thing in the entire world, and I have to do it for an hour every single day, and I would rather eat a spider." Charlotte leaned forward, her voice dropping to the conspiratorial pitch of a child sharing classified intelligence. "Miss Blackwood, do you know anything about horses? I know they bite when you approach from behind. That's more than the last governess knew. She thought carrots were poisonous to them." Charlotte's small hand landed flat on the table in outrage. "Carrots? Everyone knows horses love carrots." A serious failure of education. "Exactly what I said. Nobody listened." Charlotte studied Vivian for a long, unblinking moment, measuring, assessing, making a judgment that no adult in this house had the authority to override. "Miss Blackwood, were you afraid when you came here?" "No. You should have been. Everyone is afraid of Papa." "Are you afraid of him?" Charlotte considered this with the gravity of a high court judge. "No, but I'm his daughter. I have diplomatic immunity." Vivian laughed, a real laugh, sudden and unguarded, and Charlotte grinned the way a child grins when she realizes she has found a grown-up who will actually listen. "I'll show you the stables when we get a chance," Charlotte said. "Brutus is the best horse. He bites people he doesn't like, so he's very honest." "I appreciate honesty in a horse." "So do I. Much better than people." The Duke arrived at 11. Vivian heard him before she saw him. Boots on the stairs, a stride that did not hurry because the world arranged itself around his schedule, not the reverse. The schoolroom door opened without a knock. He stood in the frame, filling it, his coat charcoal grey, his cravat tied with the kind of careless perfection that required a valet and 20 minutes of silent effort. His eyes moved across the room. The chairs Vivian had rearranged into a half circle instead of rows. Charlotte's open geography book. Vivian standing at the window with chalk dust on her fingers and the red notebook visible in her apron pocket. He catalogued every detail. She watched him do it with the detached focus of a general surveying terrain before a battle. "Miss Blackwood." His voice was cool, measured. The voice of a man who had practiced control until it became indistinguishable from personality. "Your Grace." She curtsied. Exactly deep enough, not a millimeter deeper. I trust you've settled in. The room is adequate. The encyclopedias are 20 years out of date. 3 of the volumes are missing entirely. I suspect they've been used to prop something level in another part of the house. She paused. Lady Charlotte is extraordinary. His jaw tightened. First count. She would keep a tally in her notebook, a private scoreboard that amused her more than it should. Lady Charlotte is willful, he corrected. She requires discipline, structure, and firmness, not flattery. I disagree, Your Grace. The words landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Charlotte's head came up from her book. Even the dust motes seemed to pause in the window light. You disagree. He said it the way a man repeats a phrase in a foreign language, testing whether he has heard it correctly. Lady Charlotte requires someone who listens to her. She has been through... How many governesses, Charlotte? 4, Charlotte supplied, with the helpful brightness of a child who has been waiting her entire life for an adult to ask the right question. 4 governesses in 2 years, Charlotte added. Miss Pruitt lasted the longest. She used to let me read during deportment if I promised not to tell. Vivian looked at the Duke. 4 women in 2 years, Your Grace. Each one removed or driven out. That is not a discipline problem. That is a communication failure. The silence stretched. She could feel it pulling taut between them like a wire. Montrose's eyes narrowed. Not anger, not yet, but the first flicker of recalculation. She was not the plain, nervous creature they had described at the card table. She was something else entirely, and he had not decided yet whether that was a problem or a complication. You have opinions, Miss Blackwood. I have observations. Opinions require more data. I've been here less than a day. His mouth twitched. Not a smile. He caught it before it formed, strangled it in the cradle. But it was there, a hairline fracture in the mask, and Vivian filed it away in the same mental ledger where she kept everything else about this man. We shall see, he said, how long your observations last. He turned to leave, stopped, turned back. Miss Blackwood, the encyclopedias will be replaced by tomorrow. He left. His boots descended the stairs with the same unhurried authority they had climbed them. Charlotte let out a breath she had been holding since her father entered the room. He didn't say anything mean, she whispered, sounding genuinely shocked. Not yet, Vivian said. She opened her notebook and wrote, Day 1. Jaw, once. Encyclopedias ordered. He expected a mouse. He found something with teeth. The campaign began on day 2, and it was precise. Montrose appeared at breakfast, a meal Vivian had not expected to share with the Duke, but which apparently was household custom when guests were absent. He sat at the head of the long table. Charlotte sat to his left. Vivian sat where the housekeeper directed her, at the far end, separated from the Duke by 8 feet of polished mahogany and a silver epergne overflowing with hothouse grapes that nobody would eat. Miss Blackwood. His voice carried the length of the table without effort. I reviewed your proposed curriculum last evening. Vivian set down her teacup. She had slid the curriculum under his study door at midnight, a deliberate choice. Most governesses waited to be told what to teach. She had arrived with a plan. And? You propose to teach my daughter astronomy, among other things. Astronomy. He said the word the way one might say cockfighting, as a subject that existed but had no place in polite company. She is 7 years old. She requires French, arithmetic, penmanship, and deportment, not stars. Stars are arithmetic, Your Grace. Orbital mechanics, distances measured in light years, the geometry of constellations. And Charlotte already speaks passable French. Her penmanship is excellent when she cares about what she's writing. Vivian lifted her teacup again. She does not care about deportment. Neither, if I'm being honest, do I. Deportment is not optional for a duke's daughter. No, But it could be taught through something she actually enjoys. Riding, for instance. The posture requirements are nearly identical, and the motivation is considerably higher. His jaw clenched. Day 2, second count. Charlotte, eating toast with a studiousness that suggested she was trying very hard to be invisible while absorbing every word, broke the silence.
Papa, Miss Blackwood says the ground moves.
The ground does not move, Charlotte.
It does, very slowly. She says the Himalayas are still growing taller, 1 centimeter a year.
Montrose looked from his daughter to Vivian. Something shifted in his face. Not warmth, not anything so simple, but a crack in the certainty. Charlotte was animated. Charlotte was talking about something she'd learned with genuine excitement. He had not seen that in 2 years. Vivian could tell because his hand, which had been reaching for his coffee, paused mid-air for half a second before completing the motion. "The Himalayas," he said. "Still growing, Your Grace." Vivian smiled. Just enough. Very slowly. The afternoon brought escalation. He appeared in the schoolroom unannounced, stood behind Vivian while she taught, and corrected her pronunciation of a French verb in front of Charlotte. The correction was accurate, which was worse. She could not dismiss it. She absorbed it, adjusted, and continued teaching without breaking stride. He tried again, questioned her method of teaching long division. Too abstract, he said, not enough rote repetition. She turned from the chalkboard and said, "Would you like to demonstrate your preferred method, Your Grace? Charlotte and I are happy to observe." He did not demonstrate. He left. His jaw clenched on the way out. She could see the muscle jump even from behind. That evening she wrote, Day 2, 3 attempts. Jaw count, 4. He is testing my competence because he cannot attack my character. Charlotte likes me too much. He will try something more personal tomorrow. She was right. Day 3 began with a question, delivered over breakfast in the same cool, surgical tone he used for everything. "Miss Blackwood, I notice your references from your previous position are absent from your file." Vivian's hand tightened on her butter knife. She relaxed it deliberately. "I was not given references when I left, Your Grace." "Were you dismissed?" "The household was dissolved. My employer died." "And no member of the family provided a character?" "There was no family. He was a widower with no children. His estate passed to a distant cousin who had no interest in retaining the staff." She kept her voice level. Every word was true. Every word also concealed a bruise she had no intention of showing him. "So you arrived here with nothing but the agency's word. And my curriculum. And my ability, which you have seen in action for 2 days." "I have seen confidence, Miss Blackwood. Confidence is not the same as competence." "No," she agreed. "But dismissing one as the other is not the same as insight. It's laziness." She took a sip of tea. "Your Grace?" Charlotte's toast stopped halfway to her mouth. Her eyes moved between them like a spectator tracking a tennis ball. Montrose set down his cup with a click that rang through the breakfast room. His face was unreadable, but his jaw, that jaw, was locked so tight Vivian could see the tendons in his neck. She added another tally to the mental count and kept eating. After luncheon, she took Charlotte to the stables as promised. Brutus was a bay gelding with a Roman nose and an expression of profound skepticism toward the human race. Charlotte fed him a carrot from her palm, and the horse accepted it with the grudging tolerance of a king receiving tribute from a minor province. "He likes you," Charlotte said, watching Brutus sniff Vivian's hand and then her pocket, searching for more. "He likes my pockets." Same thing. Brutus only investigates people he approves of. He bit Lord Ashford last summer, right on the hand. There was blood. Charlotte said this with undisguised satisfaction. "Papa said Brutus needed retraining. I said Brutus was an excellent judge of character." "And what did your father say to that?" "He made the face." Charlotte demonstrated,
Jaw locked, eyes narrowed, the exact expression of a man who knows he has lost an argument to a 7-year-old and cannot admit it. The confused face, you know the one. I'm becoming familiar with it. Charlotte stroked Brutus's nose with the gentle competence of a child who had spent more time with horses than with people her own age. Miss Blackwood, why does Papa want you to leave? The question landed like a stone in water.
Vivian looked at the child, and the careful way she studied faces, the way she tested every new person with the precision of someone who had learned young that adults were unreliable, and that the only safe assumption was disappointment. What makes you think he wants me to leave? He always wants the governesses to leave. He's nice for one day, and then he gets sharp, and they cry, and then they go. Charlotte's hand stilled on Brutus's nose. I thought maybe if I was very good this time, he'd let you stay longer. Something cracked open in Vivian's chest. Not a breaking, but an unlocking. The kind of pain that comes from recognizing your own wound in someone else's face. This child had been performing good behavior as a bargaining chip, trying to buy herself a few more weeks of someone who might stay. Charlotte. Vivian knelt in the straw so their eyes were level. The smell of hay and horsesweat surrounded them, warm and honest. I am not leaving because your father is sharp with me. I have survived considerably sharper. Promise? I don't make promises I can't keep. But I will tell you this. If I leave, it will be my choice, not his, not anyone's. Charlotte studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded once, decisive, and turned back to Brutus. Good, she said, because I've already told Brutus about the constellations, and he's expecting a lesson. That night, Vivian came downstairs for a book. The library was on the ground floor, a room she had not yet explored, and she expected to find it empty at this hour. She was wrong. The Duke sat in a wing chair by the dead fire, his coat removed, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. A lamp burned low on the table beside him, casting warm, amber light across his face. And in his hands, he held something small, a miniature portrait in an oval frame. His thumb moved across the painted surface with the slow, unconscious tenderness of a gesture performed so many times it had worn grooves in the frame's gilding. Vivian froze in the doorway. She could see the portrait from where she stood. A woman with Charlotte's dark eyes, and a half-smile that suggested she had been laughing at the painter. Young, beautiful, gone. His shoulders were curved inward, his spine bent in a shape that had nothing to do with tiredness and everything to do with weight. In the amber light, stripped of his coat and his posture and his cutting syllables, he looked nothing like a duke. He looked like a man sitting in a room that used to contain someone he loved, trying to remember the exact sound of her voice and failing, and being unable to stop trying. His thumb traced the edge of the frame, back and forth. The rhythm of it, slow, mechanical, helpless, was the most private thing Vivian had ever witnessed. She stepped backward. The floorboard creaked under her heel. His head snapped up. For one unguarded second, she saw his face without the mask. Grief, raw as a wound, and the flash of fury that follows when someone sees you at your most exposed. Then the shutters came down. The jaw locked. The Duke returned. Miss Blackwood. His voice was hoarse. He cleared his throat. You require something? A book. I'm sorry to disturb you, Your Grace. You are not disturbing me. The lie was so transparent it was almost generous. A man giving her the excuse to pretend she hadn't seen what she'd seen. Vivian crossed to the nearest shelf, pulled the first volume her hand touched, a treatise on crop rotation, entirely useless, and turned to leave. Miss Blackwood. She stopped. Charlotte tells me Brutus allowed you to touch his nose. A pause. He does not permit that with most people. I've been told he's an excellent judge of character. Something moved behind his eyes. Not a smile, something more dangerous. Recognition. He was seeing her the way she had just seen him, without armor,
without performance, as a person standing in a room late at night holding a book she didn't want. "Good night, Miss Blackwood." "Good night, Your Grace." She walked upstairs and sat on her narrow bed for a long time with the crop rotation treatise unopened on her lap. She pulled out her notebook, stared at the tally of jaw clenches and cutting remarks. Then she wrote beneath it, "Day 3. He is performing. The cruelty is for his friends. The man beneath it is grieving and does not know how to stop. This changes everything." She paused, crossed out everything, and wrote nothing. Then crossed that out too, and closed the notebook without finishing the sentence. Lord Ashford arrived on day 4, unannounced, smelling of claret and cologne. The combination hit Vivian in the entrance hall like a warning shot. He carried a walking stick he did not need, and he tapped it against the marble floor in a rhythm that set her teeth on edge. The famous Governess. His eyes moved over her with the open appraisal of a man examining merchandise. "Still here, I see. That's, what, 4 days? Very nearly a record." Vivian held Charlotte's hand. The child had gone rigid beside her, her small fingers tightening around Vivian's with a grip that communicated, in the wordless language of children, a specific and deeply personal hatred. "The position suits me, my lord." "Does it?" Ashford leaned closer. She could see the broken capillaries around his nose, the slight yellowing of his teeth. "I hear Montrose has been quite the demanding employer this week. Quite exacting. One might almost call it—" "Thorough," Vivian said. "I appreciate thoroughness." Ashford's smile thinned. He looked down at Charlotte, who stared back at him with the unblinking hostility of a small, righteous animal. "Charlotte, darling, run along to the nursery." "No!" "Charlotte, Miss Blackwood and I are going to the schoolroom. We have a lesson on volcanoes." Charlotte's chin lifted. "Did you know that Vesuvius buried an entire city? The people were frozen exactly where they stood. Some of them were running. Some of them were sitting down to dinner." She paused. "Some of them were being horrible, and they got buried too." Ashford's face darkened. He straightened and looked at Vivian with something colder than amusement, the expression of a man who has made an investment and does not intend to lose his return. "Enjoy your remaining days, Miss Blackwood. These arrangements do have a way of concluding." He walked past them toward the study. Before he disappeared around the corner, he turned back. "Oh, I nearly forgot. Lady Ashford is hosting a dinner on Saturday evening. Charlotte has been invited to recite something for the guests. I do hope you'll both attend." His smile widened. "It should be quite memorable." Charlotte squeezed Vivian's hand. "I hate him," she said quietly. "That's a very strong feeling." "It's a very accurate feeling. Brutus bit him. Brutus is never wrong." That evening, Vivian found a note slipped beneath her bedroom door. Unsigned, but she recognized the stationery. Heavy cream stock, watermarked with the Montrose crest. The handwriting was angular, pressured, the writing of a man who gripped his pen too tightly. "Miss Blackwood, you may disregard Lord Ashford's remarks. He does not speak for this household." She read it twice, then she placed it between the pages of her notebook and sat on her bed, pressing her palm flat against the page as if she could feel the indentation of his pen through the paper. The man who had bet 20 guineas on her tears was warning her about his own co-conspirator. The map of James Fairfax, Duke of Montrose, was becoming more complicated by the day, and the most dangerous complication was the one Vivian refused to write down. She was beginning to care about what lay beneath the mask, and caring was not part of the plan. Day 5 brought the telescope. Vivian arrived at the schoolroom to find the fire burning, a fire that had not been lit any morning before. The old encyclopedias were gone from the shelves, replaced by new volumes with gold-stamped spines that gleamed in the firelight like a row of promises. And on the table, next to Charlotte's geography book,
Someone had placed a brass telescope in a leather case, polished to a shine that suggested it had been retrieved from storage and cleaned with care. Charlotte screamed when she saw it. Not a ladylike exclamation, a full-throated shriek of joy that probably carried to the kitchens. She seized it and ran to the window, merely destroying the inkpot, an atlas, and a chair on the way.
"It's for the stars! Miss Blackwood, it's for looking at the stars! We can see Jupiter! You said Jupiter has moons!"
Vivian picked up the note tucked beneath the case. Same stationery, same unsigned hand, same pen pressed too hard into the paper. For the lesson on things that explode. She stood there with the note flat against her palm, feeling the grooves where his pen had bitten into the word explode, and something shifted inside her that she could not shift back. He was trying, not with words. Words were his weapons, and he did not yet trust himself to use them gently. He was trying with objects, with fires lit before dawn, with encyclopedias replaced overnight, with a telescope left on a table for a child who wanted to see the sky. It was clumsy. It was inarticulate. It was the most eloquent thing anyone had done for her in years. Her notebook sat in her pocket. She did not open it. For the first time since she arrived, she did not want to keep score. He appeared that afternoon, stood by the window while she taught Charlotte about Orion, kneeling on the floor with chalk to draw the constellation on the dark boards. Charlotte knelt beside her, adding stars with the artistic confidence of a child unburdened by astronomical accuracy. "That's Betelgeuse," Charlotte said, pointing at the red dot Vivian had placed at the hunter's shoulder. "Miss Blackwood says it's dying." "Stars do not die, Charlotte." His voice came from the window, quiet. "They do, Your Grace." Vivian stood. Her knees ached from the cold floor, and there was chalk dust on her skirt, her fingers, probably her face. "Betelgeuse will exhaust its fuel and collapse. When it does, the explosion will be visible from Earth in broad daylight. For weeks." "You teach my daughter that things explode." "I teach your daughter that even enormous, powerful things are not permanent." She met his eyes. "I find it an important lesson." His jaw clenched. But something else happened too. His gaze held her as a beat past confrontation, past the chess match they had been playing all week, into a space she had not intended to enter. He was not looking at her the way a duke examines a governess. He was looking at her the way a man looks at a woman who has said something that reached a place he thought he'd sealed shut. "Miss Blackwood." Lower. "Why do you stay?" "Because Charlotte needs consistency." Other women have said the same. Other women were not being hunted for sport. The words left her mouth before she could catch them. That old reckless impulse, the part of her that would rather burn a bridge than cross it carefully. She watched them land, watched his face change, his whole body stilled, a fraction of a second where something behind his eyes moved fast, rearranging, before the composure returned. "Hunted," he repeated, slowly, testing the word for weight. Too far, or exactly far enough. She couldn't tell, and the not knowing was terrifying. "I stay because this is where I want to be, Your Grace." She softened it, not a retreat, a redirection. "Charlotte is brilliant and lonely, and she deserves someone who will not disappear. That is reason enough." He was quiet for a long time. Charlotte, oblivious on the floor, added a comet to the constellation map, a long, joyful streak of yellow chalk across the dark boards. "The dinner is in 2 days," he said finally. His voice was rough. "Charlotte's recitation. The guests will include people who will judge her harshly if she falters." "Then she will not falter." He nodded, turned to leave, stopped in the doorway, one hand on the frame, the same door frame Vivian had gripped on her first night, listening to men wager on her tears. "The chalk," he said, without turning. "On your face."
Left cheek. He left. Vivian pressed her hand to her cheek and felt the dust. She should have been embarrassed. Instead, she stood in the chalk-mapped schoolroom with its new fire and its telescope and its yellow light, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt seen. Charlotte's recitation required 3 days of work. Vivian chose the piece carefully. Not a society poem, not a simpering verse about flowers and obedience, but a passage from A Midsummer Night's Dream. Titania's speech to Oberon, the one about the seasons changing, the rivers flooding, the natural order thrown into chaos by the quarrel of two proud beings who refused to yield. It was, Vivian admitted privately, a slightly aggressive choice for a 7-year-old performing before London society. She did not care. Charlotte loved it. They rehearsed in the schoolroom every afternoon. Montrose appeared on the second day, standing in his usual place by the window, arms folded. He said nothing while Charlotte delivered her lines with the fierce concentration of a child who knows she is being trusted with something important. "The ox hath therefore stretched his yoke in vain," Charlotte recited, her small voice filling the room with a confidence that made Vivian's throat tight. "The ploughman lost his sweat, and the green corn hath rotted ere his youth attained a beard." "Slower," Vivian said. "Let the audience hear 'rotted.' It's doing work in that line." Charlotte tried again. Slower. Better. "The fold stands empty in the drowned field," Charlotte continued, and her voice dropped the way Vivian had taught her, not louder for emphasis, but quieter, forcing the listener to lean in. "Good," Vivian said. "Very good." "Is it good enough?" Charlotte's confidence wavered. She looked past Vivian to her father at the window. "Papa?" Montrose unfolded his arms. He walked to the center of the room, knelt on the chalk-marked floor, careful to avoid Orion, and looked at his daughter at eye level. "Charlotte," he said, "it is more than good enough." The child's face broke into a smile so wide it reached every corner of the room. She threw her arms around his neck, chalk dust transferring from the floor to his coat in a white handprint that his valet would spend an hour removing. He held her. His eyes, over Charlotte's shoulder, found Vivian's. "Thank you," he said. 2 words. No syllables wasted. No mask. Just a man on his knees in a schoolroom, holding his daughter, saying thank you to the woman who had taught her to trust her own voice. Vivian's eyes burned. She blinked it back. Not here. Not now. Not ever, if she could help it. "You're welcome, Your Grace." Charlotte pulled back and examined her father's coat with the clinical interest of a forensic investigator. "You have chalk on you now." "I am aware." "You look like Miss Blackwood. She always has chalk on her." "I have noticed." Charlotte beamed. "You match." The dinner arrived. Ashford's house, a sprawling pile of Bath stone on the other side of the county, lit with enough candles to illuminate a cathedral. 12 guests around a table that gleamed with silver and crystal. Vivian was not invited as a guest. She was there as Charlotte's chaperone, seated at the far end of the table, below the salt, visible to everyone, protected by no one. It was a trap. She walked into it with her notebook in her pocket, her spine straight, and Charlotte's hand in hers. Charlotte performed first. She stood before 12 adults in her best dress, her dark hair brushed smooth, her hands clasped in front of her in the posture Vivian had taught her. Not deportment, but the stance of someone who has something to say and intends to be heard. She delivered every line, slowly where Vivian had taught her to slow, quietly where Vivian had taught her to drop. When she reached, "And thorough this distemperature, we see the seasons alter," her voice carried the room, and Vivian saw, actually saw, 2 women at the table lean forward in their chairs. Charlotte finished. The silence lasted 1 full second. Then applause. Real applause. Not politeness, but the genuine surprise of people who had expected a child's fumbling recital and received something entirely else. Charlotte curtsied, walked back to Vivian, whispered, "Was that right?" "That was perfect," Vivian whispered back, and meant it completely. The first course came and went. Montrose, seated at Ashford's right in the place of honor, caught Vivian's eye once across the length of the table and held it. In his face, she read something she was not prepared for. Not gratitude, not respect, but the naked, unguarded expression of a man who has just watched a woman he is falling in love with teach his daughter to be brave, and who cannot find a single word large enough for what he feels.
Then Ashford stood. "A toast." He lifted his glass. The table quieted. "To our host. To myself, I suppose. And to the Duke of Montrose, who has shown such extraordinary patience with his household this week." His eyes found Vivian. "And to the remarkable Miss Blackwood, whose resilience has been quite the spectacle." His voice carried the theatrical rhythm of a man who has rehearsed his cruelty. One might wonder what makes this particular governess so durable. I confess I wondered myself, until I recalled a conversation among friends, a friendly wager, nothing serious, in which our dear Duke bet 20 guineas that he could make the governess cry within a week. Silence. Total. The candles flickered. 12 faces turned toward Vivian like compass needles finding north. "The week is nearly up," Ashford smiled. "I believe, Montrose, you owe me 20 guineas. The silence that followed was the kind that has edges. Vivian could feel them. The pity, the curiosity, the scandal already forming in the minds of every person at the table. This was the moment Ashford had engineered. The plain governess, exposed, humiliated, broken in public. Vivian stood. Her chair scraped against the floor, and the sound cut through the silence like a blade. "Lord Ashford." Her voice was steady. Her hands trembled at her sides, pressed against her skirt where no one could see them. "I appreciate your candor. Allow me to return it." She looked at Montrose. He had gone white. His hands gripped the table edge, knuckles bloodless, and his jaw, that jaw she had counted and catalogued and learned like a private language, was clenched so tight the tendons stood out in his neck like ropes. "I have known about the bet since the night I arrived." She let the words land, watched them detonate. "I heard you, gentlemen, through the study door. Every word, every coin on the table." Ashford's smile died. "I stayed because I chose to stay, not because I was ignorant and not because I could not leave." She pulled the red notebook from her pocket and set it on the table. The leather was worn soft. The pages were thick with a week's worth of observations. Every remark, every strategy, every jaw clench, recorded with the precision of a woman who had learned long ago that documentation was the only armor available to people without power. "I have kept a record, dated, detailed. Every attempt to break me, every tactic." Ashford opened his mouth. "I am not finished." The words came out with an edge that could draw blood, and Ashford closed his mouth. Vivian turned to Montrose. "You wagered 20 guineas you could make me cry. You tried for 2 days. On the 3rd day, you stopped." Her voice softened. Not weakness, but precision. The scalpel replacing the sword. "You replaced the encyclopedias. You lit the fire in the schoolroom. You left a telescope for your daughter with a note that made me—" She stopped, breathed. "You lost the bet the moment you started to see me. And I lost my advantage the moment I started to see you. Because I came here to win again. And instead I found a child who deserves better than a revolving door of frightened women, and a man who hides behind cruelty because grief has made him forget any other language." The room was silent. Charlotte, at the table, had gone very still. Her dark eyes moved between her father and Vivian, with the terrified focus of a child who understands
that adults are deciding something important. "I will not cry for your entertainment," Vivian said. "Not tonight. Not ever. But I will tell you this. If I leave this house, it will be because I choose to. Not because a man with too much money and too little conscience made a wager over brandy." She sat down. Her hands shook. She pressed them flat against her lap and held them there until the trembling stopped. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then the Duke of Montrose pushed back his chair and stood. He walked the length of the table, past Ashford, whose face had turned the colour of old tallow, past the guests with their suspended forks and arrested conversations, and stopped in front of Vivian. And then, in front of 12 witnesses and one 7-year-old girl who would tell this story to her own children, the Duke of Montrose lowered himself to one knee on Ashford's polished dining room floor. "I am not proposing," he said. His voice was stripped raw, scraped clean of every pretense he had ever worn. "I am apologizing. For the bet, for the cruelty, for every moment I treated you as a game instead of a person." "Accepted," Vivian said, conditionally. "Name them." "I remain Charlotte's governess." "Done." "The schoolroom gets curtains, the yellow ones Charlotte found in the attic." "Done." "And you never wager against another person's dignity. Not for money, not for sport, not for any reason." He looked up at her from the floor. From below her, a duke kneeling before a governess in another man's dining room, and his face held nothing she had ever seen in it before. No mask, no calculation, no armor. Just a man on his knees who understood, finally, that the woman he had tried to break was the strongest thing in the room. "Done," he said. "Everything. Anything you ask." Vivian reached down and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm, ink-stained, shaking slightly. "Then you may stand, Your Grace." He stood. He did not let go. "Montrose." Ashford's voice was thin with fury. "This is absurd. You cannot—" "Lord Ashford." Montrose turned, and when he spoke, his voice carried the full, freezing weight of 6 centuries of title and authority. "I am leaving your house. I am taking my daughter and Miss Blackwood with me. And if the contents of that notebook ever become necessary, I will ensure its publication in every drawing room in London." Ashford said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Charlotte climbed down from her chair and crossed the room to where Vivian and her father stood with their hands still joined. She looked up at them with an expression of profound, satisfied vindication. "I told you," she said, to no one in particular, and everyone in the room, "that Brutus was right about Lord Ashford." They left. The carriage ride home was quiet. Charlotte fell asleep against Vivian's shoulder within minutes, her breath warm and even, one small hand still clutching the hem of Vivian's sleeve. Montrose sat across from them in the dark carriage, his face intermittently lit by passing lamps, and he watched them, his sleeping daughter and the woman who had refused to break, with an expression Vivian could not fully read, but did not look away from. Neither of them spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who have said the difficult things and are resting in the space afterward, letting the words settle, letting the new shape of things become real. 3 months later, the schoolroom had yellow curtains. The telescope stood on a wooden stand by the east window, where Charlotte spent every clear evening mapping the sky in a notebook of her own, red leather, matching Vivian's, a gift from her father, who had searched 4 shops to find the exact duplicate. Chalk constellations still covered the floorboards. Vivian had stopped trying to clean them. They had become a map of everything Charlotte had learned, and everything that had changed in this room, that had once smelled of neglect, and now smelled of chalk dust and wood smoke, and the lavender Charlotte had insisted on planting in a pot on the windowsill because, she said, a schoolroom should smell alive. Vivian stood at the window, watching Charlotte in the garden below. The child was explaining something to the head gardener with expansive hand gestures. The gardener nodded along with the gentle patience of a man who had been hearing about Beetlejuice for 3 months and had accepted his fate. Footsteps behind her. She knew them now. That unhurried stride, the particular weight. Miss Blackwood. She turned.
He stood in the doorway, and the light from the yellow curtains fell across his face in a way that made him look younger, softer, like a sketch of himself before grief had finished the portrait. "Your Grace?" He crossed the room, stood beside her at the window, close enough that his sleeve brushed her arm, close enough that she could smell ink and sandalwood and the clean soap he used, details she had no business memorizing and memorized anyway, the way a person memorizes a song they did not mean to learn. "Charlotte has informed the gardener that the Himalayas are still growing." "They are." "She has also informed him that his roses will outlive human civilization." "A slight exaggeration. I'll correct it at the next lesson." "Please don't. He's taken great comfort in it." His hand found the windowsill beside hers, not touching, an inch of oak between his fingers and hers. "Miss Blackwood." "Your Grace?" "Vivian." The first time he had used her name, it landed in the room like a match being struck. She looked at him. He was already looking at her, and his jaw was clenched. That old habit, that tell she had counted and catalogued from the very first day. But his eyes were open, unguarded. The eyes of the man she had seen in the library, holding a miniature portrait. Except now he was looking at her with the same tenderness he had given the painted face. And it was so unexpected, so undefended, that her breath caught. "You changed everything," he said quietly. "This house, Charlotte, the way I—" He stopped, started again. "I was going to say the way I think, but that's not it." "What is it?" "You made me kneel." His thumb traced the grain of the windowsill, back and forth, the same unconscious rhythm she had seen him use on the portrait frame. "And I have not wanted to stand up since." Vivian turned her hand on the sill, closed the inch. Her fingers found his, warm, ink-stained, familiar now, and laced through them. The notebook sat in her apron pocket, but she had not written in it for weeks. There was nothing left to score. The game had ended the moment he knelt on another man's floor and stripped himself of everything except the truth. "Good," she said. Below them, Charlotte looked up, saw them in the window, and waved with both arms so vigorously she nearly knocked the gardener's hat off. She shouted something about Jupiter being visible tonight, and could they please use the telescope because she had just discovered that Jupiter had a storm bigger than the entire Earth. Vivian waved back. Montrose waved back. Their joined hands came up together, and Charlotte, 7 years old, precise as a compass, braver than any adult in any room she had ever entered, grinned the grin of a child who has seen the ending of this story long before anyone else thought to look. The schoolroom was warm. The curtains were yellow. The red notebook was full. And the governess, who refused to cry, stayed exactly where she chose to be. If you've ever been underestimated, if someone looked at you and saw something small, something quiet, something they could bet against, then you know how this story feels. You know that the moment you refuse to break is the moment everything changes. Tell me in the comments, when did someone bet against you and lose? I read every single one. And if this story reached you at the right time, subscribe. More stories are coming. Stories about women who stay and the men who learn to kneel.